Video games are often touted as the ultimate passage for escapism. In role-playing games, it's possible to immerse yourself in your character in an adventure that's bigger than your life. And in some games, be able to live vicariously through them. Others are simply a distraction to whatever in life might be too much to deal with. Like a good song, throwing on a game could numb you to your surroundings as well as allow you to hyper-focus on something that you're actually good at. Or bad at. Very, very bad at. Throughout my childhood, adolescence, and to a lesser degree but still prominent adulthood, I found time to lose myself in worlds being presented to me for various reasons. And I've heard the same countless times of others, with unique struggles or advantages being derived, such as Dark Souls being such a difficult game that making it past seemingly impossible challenges mere difficult task in another person's own life. Others that were so immersed in the fictional game of Paper Mario that the characters seemed to pop out to them and even started to help them to read at such a young age. In fact, I dare you to message the person you've talked to last and ask them about how either Pokemon or Final Fantasy changed their life in some way, because I guarantee that they'll be in one camp or the other.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, has Pokemon or Final Fantasy ever had a profound impact in your life?
What was that, man? Repeat that?
Yeah, can I get an order of fries, please?
I feel as though Stardew Valley is a pretty good example of this, being a game about escaping from the hardships and complexities of life and simply sitting back and building something you can call your own over time. Going from the farmland filled with clutter and a town full of people that you don't even know, to a respectable patch of land that you can grow and sell whatever you like, then meeting, befriending, and eventually marrying people of the town. Obviously, it's not the only game to do this. I've spent hundreds of thousands of hours building up the same tireless effort into MMOs like RuneScape, and all I have to show for it is, I don't even know if I can log back into my account. Haha! But MMOs offer the greatest amount of escape and fantasy needed because not only are you getting the same satisfaction of building something to call your own like in Stardew Valley, but you also get the added bonus of talking to randos. Did I really type that in the script without a single thing to add to that? But you also get the added bonus of bragging to other people online that spend significantly less time of their life grinding and instead were outside enjoying the real world. Yeah, I think that take was a lot better. It's no clear wonder why so many shows incorporate this aspect of being in a video game or in another world. The simplicity and enjoyment of entering a world devoid of seemingly predetermined outcomes, and entering into a place where objectively the more work you put in, the more you get out of it. The uncertainty of the real world and how the consequences of taking chances can really deter someone from wanting to take a try in the first place. Given enough time and effort, you can legitimately become rich while playing a game with very little risk, so long as you're willing to put in the time. And while the same could be said about living life in general, the risk greatly increases with unforeseen obstacles that could get in your way. It's no question that reality could be what you make of it. And regardless of the preparation you do to make it better, it'll never come across as satisfying as the quick gratification that video games provide, after only just a short while of engaging at least. I'm no advocate for saying that all video games are addictive, but there's a very clear correlation of escapism from a person's everyday life, and the satisfaction of diving headfirst into a game either to test or prove your skills in said game. For some, the satisfaction itself is part of the experience, much like gacha games in the aforementioned MMOs. Grinding can yield very clear and concise rewards. I can spend an entire month tiring for 8 hours a day attempting to learn how to practice shooting a bow. And while my training would pay off, and I'd have some sort of skill to show to others, the same amount of time for just one day of doing it in something like World of Warcraft would put me on par of mastery, and that result may not be anything to take into the real world. But progress is easily trackable and comparable to others playing as well. I even get a dopamine boost of the accomplishment once my skill is improved. There is undeniable proof that my character is gaining skill due to the minimal amount of effort, at least compared to what it would take in the real world. Isekai is without a doubt the epitome of escaping the harshness of reality and persevering on into an objectively better world. No, not that one. At least you can say that's the case at first glance. My man Kirito entered into the world and went from a nobody who spends most of his time playing video games to one of the most badass players, becoming a legendary status icon. And love it or hate it, that's exactly what happens in a lot of video games. I might groan nowadays when a game tells me that I've done something impossible, defeated the great evil and saved the world, since I know that literally the game guides you to do that in the most easiest way fashionable. Pokemon. But you tell a young Blinky that he's not actually the hero of Whiterun that defended the town from a dragon attack, he might actually cut you. It was very difficult and took 2 attempts, I think. I think it's pretty telling of a genre where there's so many releases of an overpowered protagoon to a mediocre world for them to try and save it. It says less about video games as a whole and more about the culture of gaming. Of course you're going to be the strongest character in a game. Of course you're the main character. SEO may get crap for turning its main character into Jesus himself, ready to save everyone from their mortal sins of not get good. But video games in general do that at its core already. It's meant to show a character that becomes a badass once it's their time to shine. The same goes for the 100 plus and counting Isekai genre that seems to be churned out at an alarming rate. The power trip fantasy isn't exclusive to Isekai, of course, with shonen being the big contender, followed by gag anime, I suppose. But there almost seems to be a need to make the hero of the show multi-classes above their peers. I don't know who made No Game No Life. Hold up a minute. Wait, he's white? Brazilian. Nice. Yu Kamiya is the creator of No Game No Life, a masterful whirlwind of drama and excitement. A true thriller that makes MLG gamers everywhere seem the theme song as their anthem. Yeah, switch it, goddamn Wraithmane, at least I've seen the sun today. The main character starts the series complaining about how the real world is rigged from the start, how you can play the game of life as optimally as you can, but certain outcomes are cheated from you. There are people who make terrible life decisions, but with the right connections and a good amount of cash, outcomes can be changed to cheat the system. Video games, on the other hand, are the great equalizer for Sora. Any outcome can be achieved so long as you follow the guidelines, and even cheaters can meet their demise with enough skill and perseverance. A sentiment that tells me 2 things. One is that our boy Yu Kamiya made this series well before the heavy invasion of microtransactions in video games, and 2 is that our protagonist Sora despises the world he lives in, using video games to escape the odds of society that's being heavily stacked against him. He pours his all into those games, rising to a heroic status with his sister, as in-game, they're a goddamn legend, topping the charts of whatever game they play. And Escapism is a perfect way to define this duo's triumphs, to the point where they're given the challenge of leaving their familiar world for one of MLG gamer hype. And there's very little hesitation in taking that leap. The exploits that Sora and Shiro are able to achieve in the games of this world are entirely that of understanding, chance, and probability, along with the honed mechanical knowledge of picking up key details. While it's only implied, Sora's inability to make that work in the real world further shoves him into being a box of an outsider shut-in that gets all of his satisfactions from games. A level of escapism that may not be too far off from how a majority of the youth my age in this demographic feel. I may not be able to get a raise at my job immediately by working harder, but all it would take for me to get that same satisfaction of moving forward is, killing all these dancing old ladies in Elden Ring for about 4 minutes until I can get enough runes to level up my deck so I can use this new weapon. You know, when I say that out loud, it kind of makes me see why politicians keep blaming video games for atrocities. Lock Horizon's protagonist Shiro has a similar foot on things in terms of video games being a proper escape. However, instead of being the chance to live in a different world where video games are used to determine outcomes, one day our protagonist finds himself suddenly in a game that he's spent a significant portion of his life in. One that he's risen to high status by simply using the mechanics of the game in clever ways. While first it's a bit disorienting to find himself stuck here, he quickly takes over in unique ways, using the new world to his advantage, taking over a city, creating a government, and politicizing himself with the inhabitants of the world. He thinks of himself as just another guy, as he is in the real world, but slowly comes to realize the wit and intelligence that he exudes in this new world, slowly able to come to terms with how much he's able to change by exerting his will into this place. It's simply so much easier to be the force that makes meaningful differences in the world behind the guise of the villain in glasses. A pseudonym given to him by other players in the game by his ability to make quick and callous decisions to get an outcome that he desires. A probably further divide between him and his real identity, as it's much easier to make those kinds of choices when the consequences aren't as dire as they would be in the real world. Disassociation is a common phenomenon when it comes to escapism. Isekai takes that to a much more interesting approach, being the Japanese name about a series of being in another world, and that association of being detached from a world that you'd be transported to when you make a mistake becomes muddied. The consequences of a person in another world would, sure, be one that they would have to live with whenever they make a rash decision, but it would be heavily compounded by the fact that the world that they live in now would have more clear rules. Sora hated his old world due to how the rules of it were so difficult to pinpoint, and how, even if he followed them, others could cheat their way to the top with underhanded advantages that weren't afforded to him. And Shiro would be able to make meaningful changes to the world around him due to all the time he spent in the game before he was transported to it. Everything he's learned from the years of the world with the rules that he fully understands pays off with every clever decision he takes to shape the world into a place that's much better for the inhabitants that resides within it. And I feel as though the isekai medium does a great job at building up the gamer archetype. A person being great at a game despite not being able to keep that same momentum and carry it forward into the real world. But what consequences does shows like this tend to have on its character's main self? And how do they tend to view themselves when outside of this persona? Isekai, I'd say, does a fantastic job of portraying disassociation, a rejection of oneself in order to achieve things under a new moniker. For all the flaws that Sword Art Online has, and the massive hate that it gets, one thing that I feel it does pretty well is build up the confidence of Kirito throughout his journey being stuck in Aincrad. Nearly instantaneous to some, I saw a character that slowly became accustomed to the world that he was stuck in, originally forced into a VR game that he was enjoying playing the beta of. He quickly became comfortable and claimed it as his home. While a person with anxieties in the real world would have troubles with being around people, the therapy of being fused with something he loves and something that makes him anxious builds him up socially and I guess in some cases physically. By the time he was fully able to beat the game and free everyone that was trapped inside, he became a lot more respectable than the traits that were hinted at the beginning of the show. It was probably poorly foreshadowed due to the feats that he was able to cast very shortly into the show, but I'm not here to talk about the writing, just what the show was going for. And as much as I'd love to dive into the low-hanging fruit that is SAO, and its tropes used, the writing does hold me back a bit more than I care to admit. Not to mention that the power fantasy isn't the only way to make a character feel empowered. While not exclusively isekai, the series Recovery of an MMO Junkie follows the journey of a character that represents themselves online as male, while they all along are female in real life. Her room is a mess, her social skills are subpar, and she recently quit her job and effectively became a shut-in. I'm starting to get deja vu. But through playing this video game, she gives herself a new edge and control in life, improving ever so slightly in the process, even meeting another player in-game with a nearly similar boat that she's in. Interested in playing a girl in the game, but actually is male in real life. Now, I don't talk about this often, but I really enjoy trans representation in media. While not trans myself, I enjoy the metaphor that it can tell of someone transitioning and becoming more free as a person. In this show, it represents others getting into themselves, and rather than coming across as someone they're not, they both come to enjoy the side of who they are in-game and genuinely are better for it in the long run of their lives. Of course, this show isn't about how becoming trans frees them from their lives. It's mostly played off as the game helping them. But if only I could come up with a better example of a show that does this in a more interesting way. But where on earth would I find something like .hack itself is a show about the popular MMO called The World. It follows a main character, Tsukasa, navigating his way through the world permanently logged in, unable to log out. As other players begin to notice, they try to befriend him, wanting to at least know what his story is, but the social barrier between him and the others are simply too deep. He doesn't quite know how to talk to others, and his memory is fuzzy of who he even is in the first place. His closest friends in the game are a talking cat and a random floating girl after all. Despite others trying their best to understand and help him, he blows them off and simply finds his freedom doing whatever he wants in-game, with that being the ultimate goal, just enjoying himself. He's not a particularly better player than anyone else. He simply navigates around the world, eventually attempting to overcome this social anxiety he has, and begins to form normal relationships with the players in order to uncover the mysteries of his past. Other players overcome similar issues on a minor scale throughout the game. Characters become more calm and relaxed after having a stressful life, such as Bear. While in-game, he's the simple father-like figure that guides and tutors players, and even given advice wherever he can. In the real world, it's revealed that he's actually a famous author, constantly harassed by his son for money, and letting it get to him to a stressful degree. Bear lets the game be an easy escape from a hectic life that he has, being a reprieve of peace that he requires. Subaru is the leader of the Crimson Knights, a guild where the game is attempting to be an unofficial police force. While she's very gentle, her determination keeps the world, the name of this game, in peace held strong. Her real life, however, isn't as free and controlling as she is in the world, as she's unable to walk due to a car accident that she's had a few years prior. Her in-game self is able to rise and govern an entire unofficial police force, unofficially, as well as grant her the authority that she lacks in the real world. Our main character, however, doesn't have much liberties. When they finally got a hold of their memories, it's revealed that not only are they a girl, but she's been in a coma the entire time, incapable of perceiving the outside world and logging into the VR game as their consciousness. Life before the coma wasn't great either, being abused and beaten by her father, and her mother unfortunately passing away. It's very likely that her time in the game was spent attempting to get away from it all as much as she needed to escape. And her eventual relationship with Subaru points towards a better life near the end of the show as things get better for her in the real world. Something that highlights the idea of video games being a nice escape, but honed into a different potential problem that stems from the removal of these facets that the online world gives. What happens when the escape from the real world isn't an option? What happens if someone is mentally moved to another world and becomes their ideal self, but then rejects the person that they really are? Or worse, the entire world itself. The culture of Japan is incredibly harsh, to say the least. Compared to the West, schooling systems are incredibly strict, stripping away the individuality from the majority of the attendees with cutthroat policies, incredibly competitive tests, and grading that pushes students to the edge, trying not to fall below the rest of the class, as well as a culture that likes to single out and ridicule anyone who likes to stand out, avoiding those who do completely. School is used to dictate what type of job one will have after graduating, so it's incredibly important to do whatever possible to stay on the straight path to having a better life. And even though it may seem as though there's a light at the end of the tunnel after graduation, work life is often reported to have similar strict policies revolving around uniformity and performance, with the added detriment of being worked to death with very little reward or compensation for doing so. It's simply expected for some to stay late and make hours in order to meet deadlines, and many of those workers cling to things that bring them joy on the weekend. While I'm sure a majority of those workers or students are aiming that towards friends or family as their main escape from the harshness of this world, I sure hope that's the case. A select few of them find themselves dragged into forms of media that aren't afraid to break conventions and express themselves however they want. Mangakas and animators also work to high hell and back. I'm sure plenty could already attest about the way that video game workers are as well. It's easy to cling to these worlds where the main character can do whatever they please, changing things along the way in ways that would make it the way they would prefer it to be. The same could be said about the various video games where all you'd have to do is play the game and you're changing a world around you just that easily. Escaping into these mediums are universal. Anyone from anywhere can easily see why losing yourself in a compelling narrative or fighting your way through a challenging or engaging video game is so freeing in the first place. One's sense of self can be lost if that's all that person wants to do with their free time. And unfortunately, it's very possible that there are several people who deeply bury themselves into these fantasies. Dating sims seem like such a silly concept, and one that I can't personally see being fun. Except for you. But somehow this genre is attributing to the rising decline of birth rates in Japan. It's becoming such a problem that the Japanese government is starting campaigns to help young adults get out there into the dating world again and find a partner. The perfect partner is out there waiting on you is something being shilled through advertisement marketing, movies, and social media. A taste of life that some rarely find, especially in such a fairy tale way. It's no wonder why some find escape into finding their type of girl or guy in that type of game. The perfect figure with features that are just unrealistic for your typical human can be found with just a few clicks and a purchase on Steam. All this essentially just to say that just in the area of Japan, the effects of video games and anime aid in the goal of escaping to another world that's devoid of such harsh and strict rules that society enforces, as well as the imperfections of living day by day. This isn't even to mention Japan's hyper-focus on cute things, further emphasizing the obsession of perfection. Not only that, but those who go through traumas at home, mentally or emotionally, can easily find themselves whisked away to a better place by turning on the television or game console to no longer need to think about it. Isekai offers a peek into this idea of what it's like to leave your life behind that you once thought was taxing or painful, and just going forward with a fun and stimulating environment you could easily fall in love with. But we've grown past the idea of simply escaping to another world. Isekai has long since had the fantasy aspect down packed, and even before it was born there were stories told of fantastical worlds to escape to. The genre, at least sticking to anime here, has come to a bit of a head on a couple series, cutting back why we want to escape, and highlighting the consequences of surrounding yourself with another world to get away from the one that you currently live in. A quick example of which would be Ascendance of a Bookworm, an interesting tale of a book-loving nerd that would shun the world around her in order to get engrossed in the stories of novels, loving them so much as to even end up getting crushed by the books that she loves so much in an earthquake that sent her to a world that has a minuscule amount of them, any of which that she can't get her hands onto to escape to. The interesting setting gives her exactly what she wants though, an escape to an interesting world similar but not like her own. And though she hardly realizes it until much later on in the story, her life is just as precious to experience where she is now, rather than just escaping away into a book any chance she gets, neglecting the friends and family back in her other lives in the process. She comes to terms with the fact that she spent a great deal of time running away from her friends and family, and neglecting them for her own satisfaction of escapism. All the while her new family in this other world may not be the family she lost before being transported. She goes on to learn to cherish these people as important to her, while also chasing the world of books that she adores so much. This, more than likely, facing herself and coming to terms with the change that she's come to be in. She's both literally a new person and reflects back to the lack of understanding of the world she's in now, and how often she's escaped despite the beauty that she already has. Something that I feel reflects our lack of understanding of the world we have now, and how often it's escaped from despite the beauty it already has. But it's easier to see things in a new light when everything is shifted around to exclude ourselves and reveal a place where we can reinvent ourselves. In video games, there's this reoccurring trope of having to defeat a character that represents your own, but obviously distorted in a way. In The Legend of Zelda, the famous Dark Link mirrors your appearance and actions with this translucent darkness, preventing you from advancing forward on your quest. Shadow the Hedgehog has the titular opposing force, being an embodiment of chaos and acting on his own to find the truth, whereas Sonic acts to preserve his status quo. In Celeste, however, the game takes a less metaphorical approach, with the main character's many fears and anxieties manifesting as a literal darkened mirror of her protagonist, one that embodies all the negative traits that Madeline holds back. By the end of the game, she realizes that not only is this the part of her that she dislikes, but it's just that. It's a part of her. Something that she can never get rid of. While she can hate who she is, that can never solve the problem of accepting herself. A wholesome facet that many come to neglect to realize in self-help. I bring this up to talk about one of my more darker topics. Deep-seated self-hatred and the neglecting of which by playing video games. I'm hiding in the fact that this is 20 minutes into a video and I have the feeling that no one's really going to get to. So I apologize if you happen to come across this. But I have this problem as well. I can't stand myself. I can't stand the sight of myself even in the mirror. Even listening back to my recordings make me feel uncomfortable. And while each friend and my mother may confide in me that I am worth loving deep down, There's this nagging feeling that who I am has no reason being worthy of getting in the way of others around me. It's why I try to shy away from being too loud or asking things of others, because I feel like I don't quite deserve being treated like a normal human being. But it's when seeing the accomplishments of the video games that I play, getting achievements in games that have a low completion rate, being slightly good in a video game, and being able to competitively and consistently beat others in them. And even the small victories of beating bosses in Elden Ring. Heck, completing a speedrun in a game with a certain amount of time gives me a sense of joy and pride in myself. This avatar on screen can represent me, and I actually feel proud of that and let loose to enjoy. Video games may not be the vast escape that it used to be, but they've taken form in many different ways. They make me feel competent, make me feel like perhaps I really am worth the atoms that make up my body in some way, shape, or form. Which is why a series like ReZero stood out to me. The aspect of being able to die and come back to life was a concept that I always enjoyed. Groundhog Day series are one of my favorite genres, but there was simply something about the main character's demeanor that always clicked with me. A superpower that lets you come back to life when you die and redo something that you failed at is incredibly useful. But time and time again, the main character experiences pain over and over again, just to keep the people in his life whole, using his power multiple times by killing himself to get the outcome that he wants, feeling the pain of death each time he's doing it. In the light novels, it's revealed that he makes sure that he dies in the worst way he can to feel the most of the pain, likening it to a punishment for not being good enough for the others around him, a failure that wasn't strong enough to save those closest to him. Death after death, it becomes clear that his biggest issue is that he fails to take account of the people around him that care for him. He considers himself a lone hero that has the burden of the fate of the world on his shoulders. Yet time and time again, it's been proven how much those around him care. His self-defeating attitude stands in stark contrast of each relationship he builds, with others around him seeing sides of him that he is yet to realize exists. Something that I'm sure many others can relate to. The mere existence of a friend can be enough of a beacon of joy to another, something nearly impossible to tell unless it's outright stated. And while Subaru's self-hatred might impede with his depiction of reality and self-worth, his willingness to give his all to help an ally in need, dying or otherwise, is an admirable trait to itself. He's even neglected this in his own world, feeling as though he's nothing but a disappointment to his parents. The expectation to live up to his father crushed him in his self-worth. Yet, in reality, all that was really needed from him was just to be the Subaru that he was. His attempts to reinvent himself in the world backfire as the Natsuki Subaru that many others in the ReZero world came to love was the character that he had, not the one that he wanted to portray. While the traits and likability of who he was wasn't plainly written in some code somewhere in a value slider in the game, who he is who he is. And being in another world isn't going to change that so easily. One of my favorite songs, without a doubt, is Only by Yukio Ohara from the series Mushoku Tensei. While itself being a peaceful and relaxing song to end an episode on, the amount of emotion and expression that it has transcends the barrier of language that I and it shares. Or don't share. It's a love story of someone who's learned so much from a friend or mentor. As a result, spends their waking moments wanting to be with the person emotionally. Something that either alludes to the main character, Rudius, teaching a young girl, Sylphie, the wonders of magic and giving her a caring friend, or his mentor, Roxy, giving Rudius a social leap forward that he wasn't able to take once before, as well as teaching him to hone his magical prowess, a potential budding young love story for either of the two. I think it's a pretty common thought for someone to think that most love songs are cheesy. After all, out of context, I'm pretty sure they all are. But coupled with the show, the underlying message of these can be interpreted with a myriad of powerful ways. I, for one, don't like Rudius, the main character. Or at least there are a ton of times in which I strongly feel like I don't. But the world that the main character was born into gives Rudius, a shut-in that hated interacting with everyone to the point of skipping his own parents' funeral, a redo at life for him in a world of fantasy, giving him another chance that he didn't quite have before. Rudius isn't a completely irredeemable person, being the type to protect and care for others, going so far as pushing someone out of the way to save their life and losing his own in the process. But there's certain eccentricisms that our protagonist has that would make anyone question him. It's a ginormous flaw, one of many that makes him despise the person he is. And although he comes to learn how inappropriate his behavior is, him growing as a person bleeds into how he grows in many other facets in the world. Having a second chance at life grants him the drive to study hard and do better this time, which gets him perceived as a prodigy. He becomes a genius in language and magic, inspiring and teaching others around him with the same amount of hard work that he puts in. Despite the amazing talents that he has, he still tries hard to overcome the self-hatred that he has so desperately. He teaches a young girl about magic and outshines a sage in her own craft at a really young age, inspiring them to shine just as brightly as how they perceive Rudius to be, becoming obsessed with the way he carries himself, his talent of skill, and the effortlessness of his feats. While our main character is still getting over himself and the many flaws that he has, others see him in a totally different light, and come to love the side that he has no idea that he's exuding. There's actually another reason why I enjoy the song so much. A few faces come to mind that, over the years, I could see as a person in my life that has taught me and gives me so much of the same feeling that the song injects into me. One that I consider as seemingly shining like a beacon, but have no idea of all the amazing things that they do. The helpless romantic that I am makes me wonder if anyone's ever felt the same way about me. Relationships are one thing, but I never quite feel like I've made that impact that someone else has in my life. I might be taking advantage of the fact that no one's going to make it this far into the video. Escapism media is a powerful tool to displace yourself with, well, yourself. It becomes easy to remove yourself from the person that you do or don't wish to be. But not only could you be taking a bit of yourself into a world that you're escaping into, you're undoubtedly taking these things out as well. For better or worse, the media that you're using to escape to does cling to you, creating a false self that you could never perceive properly. But it can also install in yourself the you that you could be. The possibility that maybe that book you've read of the amazing character, that video game you play where you conquered an entire town, or even that show that you watch where the main character looks and acts so much cooler than you'll ever be gets transposed into you in some way. And while you might not be able to level city with this power, you can still affect the people around you with your own talents. And although the progress of which might be impossible to tell without any indicators, just know that the people around you can see it and actively check your progress just as much as you come across yours in game. I don't know, man. This analogy kind of got out of hand. I guess all I really have to say is thank you for making it this far into the video. I say it every time I make a video, and it's true. I don't know who makes it this far, and my analytics say that 20% or so do. But the fact that anyone is actually listening to my mindless ranting and rambling into the world makes me feel so much better. Just the fact that you made it this far into the video gives me happiness, and I appreciate you. If you did happen to come across anything personal, keep that between us, please. It's not something I like talking about much, but it does help to vent it out, especially in a place that I think I'm safe in. But thank you again. But now with all that sappy crap out of the way, if you want to hear more of me, I did a kind of podcast thingy with Durkoin. That's how I say Durkoin, right? It's over here. Or maybe it's over there. There isn't anything pointing, so I guess I'm just talking into the void. I'll see you tomorrow. I love you. Goodbye. Goodbye.